Good morning, and welcome to Enterprise Minnesota's 2020 State of Manufacturing Survey Release Event. I'm Tom Whelan, and I'm here to be with you to host this year's virtual event. We're pleased to be joined by nearly 600 registrants from throughout the state who are anxious to hear the survey results. We've already heard from a viewer in Crookston who says, "Would you please put the music back on?" And we say, "Larry, you're going to have to wait till later." The State of Manufacturing is the most comprehensive survey of Minnesota's manufacturers that reveals their perceptions and opinions on the economy and other issues impacting business. For 12 years, Enterprise Minnesota and its sponsoring partners have helped Minnesota's manufacturing executives use the state of manufacturing to make their voices heard through the survey and focus groups. For those of you new to us, Enterprise Minnesota is a 30-year-old consulting organization that specializes in helping manufacturing enterprises grow profitably. They are also the official Manufacturing Extension Partnership representative for the state. Most would agree that 2020 has thrown us more curveballs than we would expect to see in a lifetime. Manufacturers have adapted on the fly, and Enterprise Minnesota has followed their lead. One of the most visible changes has been conducting this year's 11 focus groups and almost 20 manufacturing workshops virtually. In addition, this is the first time the State of Manufacturing has been broadcast live online. The format will be the same, with a thought-provoking analysis of the survey results from pollster Rob Autry, followed by a panel of Minnesota manufacturers and educators. These are discussions you won't want to miss. I've come to greatly appreciate the critical service that Enterprise Minnesota provides to so many people, and it's my honor to introduce its president, Bob Kill. Bob's leadership has helped the organization become the voice of manufacturing in Minnesota. He is committed to connecting public and private stakeholders to foster the collaboration needed to produce a thriving manufacturing industry in our great state. Please join me from wherever you're viewing this event in welcoming Bob Kill. Bob?
Thank you, Tom, and good morning. Enterprise Minnesota launched the State of Manufacturing some 12 years ago to personally survey Minnesota's manufacturing executives about what they considered the most daunting challenges and most significant opportunities in their paths to profitable growth. We aimed high. From the beginning, we designed the State of Manufacturing to be far more serious than the typical internet poll or call-in survey that asks 4 or 5 questions in search of a cheesy headline. We wanted to interview a statistically precise, random sample of manufacturing executives representing the entire state. To do this right, we needed a top pollster, someone with a national reputation for accuracy and insightful analysis. To that end, we recruited Rob Autry, founder of Meeting Street Insights. Rob's company has conducted every one of our State of Manufacturing surveys. Our instincts have proven correct. Rob was recently named top pollster in America by a National Association of Polling Professionals. We gave the State of Manufacturing additional credibility by adding 12 to 15 focus groups to the research mix each year. Over time, that has proven to be a valuable decision. The polling data tells us what manufacturers are thinking. The focus groups tell us why. And we've never needed it more than this year. The 2020 version of the State of Manufacturing has attempted to illuminate how the weirdness of COVID-19 and the government's attempts to deal with it have affected Minnesota's manufacturers. And we have never seen a better example of how data and focus group interviews can work together to help find clarity in a murky marketplace. The survey analysis we're about to hear from Rob is maybe the most nuanced in the 12 years he's reported this data. Few of you are going to leave your computers today thinking, here's what manufacturers think, or here's what manufacturers need, or here's what manufacturers want. We have experienced many years of that kind of unified messaging, but this is not among them. I think about the Great Recession of 2009, the first year we conducted the survey. Back then, all the manufacturers were caught flat-footed by the collapse of the American economy, and all were affected basically on similar terms. The differentiator in those days was who was best going to exploit the downtime to position their company to take advantage of the economy's eventual comeback. The effects of the 2020 COVID economy have hit all manufacturers differently. But there are similarities, of course. Manufacturing floors contain more plexiglass than they once did. Employees are wearing masks or shields. They are social distancing. Many are working from home. Some manufacturers are gasping to keep up with skyrocketing demand, while others are gasping to keep solvent. Once reliable supply chains have for some become unstable and unresponsive. Trade shows, at least for now, have become a relic of the past, and so have customer visits. To address this, manufacturers have increasingly relied on internet and mobile technology for sales, customer contact, supply chain communication, or even just monitoring off-site employees. And so, I wasn't surprised when many mentioned that information and cybersecurity has catapulted to a top corporate concern. If there's a surprise in our focus group research, it was how cybersecurity has become a first-tier priority for so many manufacturers. But my takeaway from this year's focus groups was far more personal than in other years. The fact that we had to conduct them via Zoom surprisingly seemed to make participants more reflective and candid than when we sat around a conference table. I was continually impressed by how manufacturers were stepping up to take care of their employees. Some made room in the office so that students could do homework while their parents worked. Others allowed flexible work days to accommodate classroom schedules. Slowing sales forced some to cut their work week to 4 days and their work days to 6 hours. But in doing so, they did not reduce their employees' compensation. In Alexandria, some manufacturers facilitated open trades of employees so that hard-hit companies could temporarily relocate employees to companies that were struggling to keep up with demand. There are many more examples, and I encourage you to go to our website and read the transcripts of our focus groups to see how manufacturers truly are responding. The discussions are fascinating. For me, I walk away from every state of manufacturing survey with a deeper appreciation of how Minnesota's manufacturing executives continue to drive their local economies by finding more strategic ways to meet the demands of their increasingly global markets. But this weird COVID-themed state of manufacturing survey reinforced for me how much I like and appreciate Minnesota's manufacturers and how when times get tough, they care for their employees and their communities. But they are not just good business executives, but they're great corporate citizens. Now, on to the 2020 State of Manufacturing Survey, the 12th annual, but first, recognition of the many organizations that have helped make it happen. Let me start with our statewide platinum sponsors. Bremer Bank, the banking industry, a long-term sponsor. FMJ, Granite Equity, Gray Search and Strategy, King Solutions, the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development, Olson Thielen representing accounting and consulting, Production offering employee services, and Widseth, architects and engineers. To our statewide focus group sponsor, Productivity Inc., thank you. And to our silver executive focus group sponsors ranging from our technical colleges to economic development to organizations across the state of Minnesota. And lastly, before I turn it over to Rob, I'd like to thank the Enterprise Minnesota Board of Directors representing size diversity, industry diversity, and geographical diversity of manufacturing from across the state. And now, on to the results with Rob Autry.
Thank you, Bob. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. And it's a pleasure to be a part of this project for each of the 12 years we've conducted this study. Since 2008, we have spoken to nearly 5,000 manufacturers across the state. This year's study was conducted September 8th through October 7th among 400 manufacturing executives statewide. These are owners, operators of manufacturers in the state of Minnesota. In addition to those interviews, we also conducted oversample interviews of at least 50 interviews in each of the 6 Minnesota Initiative Foundation regions. This allows us to look at every corner of the state to see how manufacturers are doing, what they're concerned about, and what are some of the opportunities and challenges they see ahead. And so with that, let's turn to this year's findings. As we have seen from the very beginning of this project in 2008, manufacturers are eternal optimists. When you ask them from a financial perspective, how do you feel right now about the future of your company? 85% of manufacturers today say they're confident about the financial future. A vast majority of manufacturing executives have said that in every year of the 12 years we've conducted this study. What's different and unique about this particular survey, though, is we've seen a noticeable increase in the percentage of manufacturers who are not confident about the financial future of their firm. Compared to where we were in March of 2019, the percentage of manufacturers who are not confident has increased nearly threefold, from 5% to 14%. It's the lowest level of confidence we've seen since 2014. A key driver of that, clearly, is concerns and increased concerns about recession. When you ask manufacturing executives about the year ahead, do they anticipate it being a year of economic expansion, a flat economy, or recession? We've seen noticeable differences this year from what we saw a year and a half ago. Today, 40% of manufacturing executives expect this to be a flat economy. 20% believe it will be a year of economic expansion. And 36%, nearly 7 times higher than what we saw in March of 2019, 36% believe we're heading into a year of recession. That recessionary fear number is the highest it's been since 2008 in our study. And in addition to that, more manufacturers today believe Minnesota's business climate is getting worse as opposed to getting better. In the previous 3 years that we've tested this question, we found a plurality of manufacturers believe the economy and the business climate in the state were getting better. This year, things have changed. Only 27% of manufacturers believe the state's business climate is getting better, 35% believe it's staying the same, and 35% believe it's getting worse, a percentage that's up 20 points from where it was a year ago. And that's what's happening at the 30,000-foot level. When you ask individual manufacturing executives how things are going in their company, we see noticeable changes as well. 3 of the key business metrics that we have been tracking since 2008 are gross revenue, profitability, and capital expenditures. What you see here in this chart are the percentage of manufacturers who are expecting to see increases in each of these 3 metrics for the year 2020. What you see this year compared to what you've seen in the past is a sharp decline in the percentage of manufacturing executives who expect to see an increase in revenue. In 2019, it was 59% who expected to see an increase in revenue. This survey, only 21%. In 2019, 45% of executives expected to see an increase in profitability. Today, it's only 24%. And capital expenditures, which has declined a little bit and has been pretty consistent throughout the course of this project, only 25% expect to see increases. Compare these numbers to where we've been in the past, and you have to go all the way back to 2008 to find levels this low of manufacturers expecting to see increases in profitability and gross revenues. And in fact, it's not just the change in increases that we're witnessing in this data set. We also see a dramatic increase in the number of manufacturers who are expecting gross revenues and profitabilities to actually decline in 2020. This chart compares the numbers we saw in March of 2019 to where we stand today. And you can see when it comes to increases in gross revenues, compared to where we were a year and a half ago, they're down 38 points. But decreases in gross revenue are up 42 points, nearly half. 48% of manufacturing executives expect to see a decrease in their gross revenue. That's a level 16 points higher than what we saw in December of 2008. Also, if you look at decreases in profitability, we were at 9% in March of 2019. We're at 41% now who expect to see a decrease in their profitability. And that's 7 points higher than what we saw in December of 2008, our previous low point. And importantly, it's not just a little bit of a decrease they're expecting too. This chart tracks the percentage of manufacturers expecting decreases of more than 10% in gross revenues, profitabilities, and capital expenditures. And when you look at the numbers and how they compare, you can see the sharp increase in the number of manufacturers expecting big decreases, significant decreases in their revenues and profitabilities. 39% of manufacturers today expect their gross revenues to decrease by more than 10% in this year. That's up from 4% a year and a half ago. 33% of manufacturing executives expect to see a decrease of more than 10% in their profitability, and that's up from 5% a year ago. Capital expenditures or decreases in that are also up as well, more than twice what we saw a year ago. But what's shocking and surprising about these numbers too is those decreases of more than 10% for revenue and profitability are higher today than they were 12 years ago in December of 2008. Clearly, a big reason why, or the major reason why, is COVID-19. We asked business executives two questions here. What impact do you think COVID-19 outbreak has had on the state's economy and business climate? And then we also asked them, what impact has it had on your individual business? Starting with the top half of this chart here. 66% of executives say COVID-19 has had a major impact on the state's economy and business climate. 26% say it had a modest impact. Only 7% said it's either had a minor or no impact at all. So 92% have said it had a major or modest impact on the state's economy and business climate. Equally high, the percentage of companies or executives who say it's had an impact on their own individual businesses. 35% say COVID-19 has impacted their business in a major way. 35% modest. Only 29% said it's only had a minor or no impact at all. 70% of manufacturing executives say COVID-19 has had a significant impact on their individual business. And you can see across the board here, it's impacting companies of all sizes and of all locations. Some of the key demographic breaks that we look at here are regions, companies within the Twin Cities metro area, those outside in greater Minnesota, those with less than $1 million in revenue, $1.5 million in revenue, over $5 million in revenue, and those that have 50 or fewer employees, and those who have over 50 employees. When it comes to the impact on the state's economy and business climate, it doesn't really matter what type of manufacturer or where you're located or how much your revenue or number of employees you have. You generally all agree that it's had a major or significant impact on the state's economy. We are seeing, though, among lower revenue firms, those with less than $1 million in revenue, those who have 50 or fewer employees, the smaller manufacturers are more likely to say COVID-19 has had a major impact on their business than your larger companies. And going to those Minnesota Initiative Foundation regions again, we see a very interesting difference here by location. If you essentially take the state and put a line right down the middle from the top to the bottom, you see those Minnesota Initiative Foundation regions on the western side, the Northwest Minnesota region, the West Central Initiative, the Southwest Initiative Foundation, are less likely to say COVID-19 has had an impact on their economy and a little less likely to say it's having an impact on the state's business climate and economy as a whole. Compared to those on the eastern side of the state, the Northland Foundation, the Initiative Foundation, the Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation, a little bit higher levels of impact on individual companies and a little bit higher impact on the state's economy and business climate. Next, shifting our gears to key concerns facing manufacturers today. We've been asking this series since the very beginning in 2008, and we asked manufacturers to rate on a scale of 1 to 10, how concerned are they about each of these individual issues? And the percentages you see here on this slide are those who rated an 8, 9, or 10, meaning they're very concerned about these issues. At the top of the list this year, the cost of healthcare coverage. 50% say that is a high concern for them and their company. That's been the top issue in every single one of the 12 surveys we've done since 2008. Compared to where it was in 2019, though, it's actually dropped. It was at 58% in 2019. Today, it's at 50%. We have seen an increase in concerns about economic and global uncertainty. 39% rate that as a key concern, the second highest, and it's one that's increased by 23 points since 2019. Also, sort of top-tier concerns: attracting qualified workers, retaining qualified workers. Cybersecurity, which is the first time we've asked it in this survey, came in at 30% who say they are concerned about that issue. Developing future leaders, government programs resulting from the pandemic, cost of salaries, and at the bottom, getting your products to market. Only 15% raised that as a concern. It is 5 points higher, though, than where it was a year ago. I think what's particularly interesting about this data is our ability to go all the way back to the first year, in some cases, where we started asking these questions. In the case of healthcare, I've mentioned in every single survey that we've conducted since 2008, it's been the top concern. That's the case here today. But as you can see, certainly over the last 4 years, 50% concern is at its lowest level. And in fact, the previous low was in 2016 when 51% rated a concern. Today, it's at its lowest level it's been. Attracting workers is down 10 points from where it was a year ago, down 11 points from where it was 2 years ago. As a metric, this has bounced around quite a bit, but we had seen since 2018 heightened concern around this issue, and it's died down a little bit in importance. What clearly hasn't died down, though, is economic uncertainty. As a percentage, it's up 23 points from where it was a year ago. It is by far at its highest level since we started asking this question in 2014. Also at its highest level is developing future leaders. That's up 5 points from where it was a year ago at 28%, higher than it's ever been since we started asking this question in 2015. And as we saw with impact of COVID-19, there are some interesting and not so subtle differences by region. Again, if you kind of divide the state from top to bottom, those foundation regions on the western side tend to be more concerned about workforce-related issues, attracting workers, retaining workers, developing future leaders. Those three concerned areas rank in the top 4 in each of the 3 more Western Initiative Foundation districts. That doesn't happen on the eastern side of the state. It's not to say it's not important. As you can see in the Northland Foundation, attracting workers is the top concern. It's second highest in the Initiative Foundation, and it's the third highest in the Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation. But concerns about the economy, the cost of healthcare, tend to play a more outsized role in the eastern part of the state than it does in the western half. In addition to concerns, we also ask manufacturing executives, what are 1 or 2 of the biggest challenges your company is facing that might negatively impact your future growth? And we've seen some really dramatic differences this year. An unfavorable business climate is seen as the biggest challenge that could negatively impact your future company's growth. That's up 14 points from where it was a year ago. 33% say that is one of the biggest challenges their company is facing. Attracting and retaining qualified workforce is second at 32%. That's dropped off considerably from where it has been the last 2 years, but it's still pretty much tied as the biggest challenge companies are facing today. Cost of healthcare is down to its lowest level since we've asked it in this survey. In 2014, it's 26% today, down 4 points from a year ago. One of the new ones that we asked, which is the third from the bottom there, getting operations up and running and back to normal, clearly is a concern. to about a quarter or a fifth of all companies statewide, 19% listed as one of the biggest challenges their company is facing, likely taking away some of the oxygen from some of these other issues up at the top. And when you look at this by the type of companies, we really see some interesting differences based on revenue size and employee size. What I mean by that is workforce-related concerns or challenges tend to play a more outsized role in larger companies, those with over 5 million in revenue. 50% of them say their biggest challenge is attracting and retaining a qualified workforce. Among those companies that have over 50 employees, 55% say attracting and retaining a qualified workforce is their top challenge. Every manufacturer across the board lists unfavorable business climate as a key concern, and there's really no differences there. But workforce-related issues tend to be a bigger deal for larger companies. Getting operations up and running tends to be more of a concern for the smaller revenue and smaller employee size firms. And even though we've seen a decline in concern about qualified workforces from what we've seen in previous years, still, even though we're in the middle of a pandemic, nearly 2 out of 3 manufacturers say it's difficult to find qualified workers that they need in their company. 62%. That percentage is down from 71 a year ago. And the percentage who say it's not difficult has gone from 26 to 34. If you're looking for sort of a historical comparison, it's very similar numbers to what we saw in 2013. But as we've seen consistently since 2011, majority of manufacturers still say it's difficult to find the qualified workers they need. Now, when manufacturers are out looking to attract and hire new employees, what is it they want their company to be known for? A plurality say they want to be known, 29%, for having a great work environment. Next, 15% work-life balance and an industry leader. 8% say it's a competitive salary. 5% company mission, 5% career growth, 5% employee value, employee safety. Some interesting differences when you look at them by types of companies. Your smaller manufacturers, both in terms of revenue and employee size, place more of a premium on building a great work environment, whereas your higher revenue and your larger employee size firms are more likely to be known as an industry leader. Companies across the board, regardless of size, regardless of location, also are concerned about a work-life balance. Also, we find in the survey, finding new customers and new markets is more important today than it was a year and a half ago. When you ask them what are the 2 or 3 most important drivers of your company's future growth, 59% say new customers and new markets. That's up 6 points from where it was in 2019. Maximizing productivity is down rather dramatically, 22 points from where it was a year and a half ago. Only 27% say that is one of the more important drivers of their company's future growth. New products also ranks highly at 24%. Better strategic planning and implementation, down a little bit from where it was in 2019 and 2018. But the big one, again, is finding new customers and new markets. Nearly 6 out of 10 manufacturing executives say that's the most important driver of their company's future growth. We also wanted to touch on in the survey a little bit about automation. So what we tested here are 2 different things. Starting with the left-hand side of this chart, we asked manufacturing executives, is your company using automation more or less than you expected at the beginning of the year before the COVID-19 outbreak? What we found, 50% of executives say they're using about as much automation as they expected at the beginning of the year. A quarter, 25%, said they're using automation more than they expected at the beginning of the year. And 20% said they're using automation less than they expected at the beginning of the year. We also wanted to know, to what degree did the global pandemic and COVID-19 have on that? How much would you say your company's automation use changed as a result of the pandemic? Now, Those using more automation, 47% say they're doing so because of the pandemic. 53% say they are not. So nearly half of those who are using more automation say it's being driven by the pandemic. Those that are using less, only a quarter say that's the case. 75% of those who are using less automation say it's not at all the result of the pandemic. We asked executives as well, does your company have a succession plan? And we asked the same question in 2017. We thought it would be a good time to check in to see where manufacturers are today. And the numbers haven't changed a lot. In 2017, 50% of manufacturing executives say their company has a succession plan. Today, it's 49%. A slight plurality say they do. Here again, we wanted to know, has COVID-19 and the global pandemic affected your succession planning in any way? So when we look at those who do have a succession plan, 14% say COVID-19 and the global pandemic has actually accelerated their planning. 19% say it's delayed it. Now, those that don't have a plan, only 5% say the pandemic has actually caused them to accelerate their planning. 23% say they've actually delayed planning as a result. So while the percentage of manufacturers have a succession plan is steady and at 49%, the data certainly suggests that COVID-19 is causing quite a few manufacturers to perhaps delay planning for the future. Manufacturing executives also say that COVID-19 has impacted their original plan for 2020 growth or recovery. 59% say the pandemic and COVID-19 has changed their original plan. 40% say it has not. And what's striking about this data is just how consistent it is by type of company. So whether it's a company in the Twin Cities or in Greater Minnesota, less than $1 million in revenue, more than $1 million in revenue, fewer than 50 employees, more than 50 employees, a very similar level of a majority level say that the pandemic and COVID-19 has forced them to change their original plan for 2020. And then finally, we wanted to hear from manufacturing executives what exactly they felt their state leaders should do to help support small businesses in manufacturing, certainly in these uncertain times. And so we asked them, from this list here, which of these would you support the governor and state legislature doing to support small businesses in manufacturing? And there were three things that came in pretty similarly. 32% would like the governor and legislature to offer tax incentives. 28% would like the governor and the state legislature to make direct investments in small manufacturers to help create and preserve jobs. And 26% would like to see some type of easing or reforming of government regulations. And when a lot of times we see policy differences based on different types of manufacturers, this isn't one of those times. And in fact, manufacturers of all types find broad agreement on what they think the governor and state legislature should do to help small businesses in manufacturing. So whether it's tax incentives, which tend to be favored a little bit more by greater Minnesota firms and a little bit by smaller firms, or making direct investments, which across the board seems to be a very popular policy position. Manufacturers of all types find broad agreement in each of these three areas. So, in closing, the long shadow of the COVID-19 economy has triggered the greatest plunge in optimism among manufacturers since the Great Recession of 2008, the first year we've conducted this project. And what we see in this survey is that the number of manufacturers who are expecting their revenues to go up in 2020 has never been lower. And the number of executives who fear recession has increased sevenfold from where it was just a year and a half ago. And confidence in the state's business and climate is half of what it was just 2 years ago. When we ask manufacturers why that's the case and what's impacting it, they overwhelmingly tell us COVID-19 and the global pandemic has had an impact on their companies. In fact, 2/3 of manufacturers say COVID-19 has impacted their original plans for growth in 2020. You also see a noticeable increase in concern about the economic and global uncertainty around the pandemic. That's now become a top concern along with the cost of healthcare coverage. But even in the midst of a pandemic, the demand for qualified workers remains high. Nearly 2 out of 3 manufacturers tell us it's difficult to find the qualified workers they need for their companies. And this is particularly the case among larger manufacturers. So when we ask manufacturers, what should the governor and state legislature do to help small businesses and manufacturers? They tell us help through tax incentives and direct investments in small companies like manufacturers to create and preserve jobs should be their focus. And finally, as manufacturers increasingly rely on the internet to replace in-person sales and communications, we're seeing in the survey, cybersecurity is taking on an increasingly important role for manufacturers across the state. So I thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing you next year.
Thank you, Rob. Those are some compelling results of the survey, and we're going to continue the discussion by digging a little bit deeper. We're going to turn now to our panel of Minnesota manufacturers. On our panel this morning, we have Dr. E.J. Daigle, the Dean of Robotics and Manufacturing at Dunwoody College of Technology, Dave Dickirson, General Manager of Plastech Corporation, Bob Kill, who you've already met, the President and CEO of Enterprise Minnesota, and Jason LaValley, the CEO and founder of LaValley Industries. You can find bios of each panelist on the Enterprise Minnesota website or in the email for today's event. They've promised me I won't have to use my mute button this morning. It's a good-looking crew. I don't know how often you guys wear ties, but you look fantastic. Let's go back a year. We hadn't yet heard of COVID. As you were ending 2019, what was your outlook for 2020? Jason, you're in Bemidji. What were you looking at for this year?
Well, things were looking good. Of course, we had the election coming up, and that's always had an impact on us. But we coming off a record-breaking year for us in manufacturing, and had been gaining speed, 3 years prior to that. So things were going really good. We had some real good forecasts and projections.
Dave, you're part of Franson Corporation, and then you're looking at 4 different companies. What were you looking at across your umbrella?
Yeah, for our projection for 2020 into 19 was up about 10%. Yeah, but what happened, Tom, is significant growth. We had an initial downturn with the COVID, and then a significant uptick, and I'm sure we can cover that in a little bit.
Sure. Okay, so COVID comes along. Well, 70% of the manufacturers say that COVID-19 has had an impact on their businesses. It hasn't necessarily been a negative impact. Would you agree or disagree? Let's go to Dave first.
Yeah, as we were just talking about, again, we were going into 2020, projecting a little bit up, planning for that, capital, things of that nature. The COVID hit, and it was a pretty significant hit. We have 4 manufacturing companies and 40 banks. All 4 took an initial hit. However, very quickly, a couple of the companies went up significantly. One of those is our Miller Manufacturing out of Glencoe. And they are pet and agricultural, selling to a fleet farm, tractor supply, and so on. And with the COVID, a lot of people want to be more self-sufficient. So whether that's growing crops, raising chickens, livestock, whatever. So, Tom, we are up 40% right now. It's been unbelievable to try to grow and increase our utilization. The plant that I work in is a plastic injection molding company, actually in Anoka now. And we're making a lot of products for Miller, and it's very difficult for us to keep up.
Okay. Dr. Daigle, may I call you EJ? Is that okay?
Please call me EJ.
So what's been the impact of COVID on things at Dunwoody in your business?
I've been here almost 20 years now, and this last year has just been a roller coaster for us here at Dunwoody. Our enrollment had been growing steadily for several years. We went on spring break this last spring, right as COVID was kind of making its mark, and we never got a chance to come back from spring break. So the welders and the machinists and the drafters and the designers and my electronics students, everybody that's going to school for that applied hands-on learning, they had to spend 9 weeks, the last 9 weeks of the semester, doing that remotely. And I think many of you might have kids at home right now doing remote studies or hybrid studies, and imagine trying to do that with a really hands-on curriculum like welding or machining or something like that. The good news is we came up with a strategy here at Dunwoody to bring our students back this fall. After we were able to come back and meet the CDC requirements to come back and teach in person. We're running small classes right now. A lab that might have had 16 to 20 students in it now has 8 to 10 students in it. So we really have to spread our labs out. We utilize more of the building, but less students on campus at any given time. So at any given time, there's only about a third of the students that would normally be on campus. It really is a benefit for the students. The hands-on education is really one-on-one focused right now. So they get a lot of attention from their faculty member. They get a great opportunity to learn. And what I'll tell you, if I talk to the students that were here during the COVID shutdown, the COVID online experience, they're really happy to be back. They're really happy to have the tools back in their hands. They're happy to be back on campus. And only a few students, a very, very few students didn't come back. And most of those were because they had some sort of underlying health concerns and they wanted to take a year off their education. But we're doing great here, and it's just fun to see. I can look down the machine shop right now and see students working. So it's just a great opportunity.
So we have a mixed bag here. Jason, it's not always good news in what you're seeing, is it?
Oh, it's not always good. And I mean, of course, I'd like to see people that are doing well in this, and Dave's obviously doing very well. But for us, and we're kind of tied to the oil and gas industry, about 90% of our business, and we're seeing a drastic decrease in sales. And a lot of it has to do with, this initially everybody had a shortcoming and was having some problems, as Dave said, but they started to pick up. We didn't. Because at the same time that happened in March with the COVID hitting, the pandemic, we also had a large purchase of oil from Saudi Arabia that Trump bought, right? And that had an impact with the energy companies, I guess of up to 20%. Their stocks went down in oil production, which were affected with the construction of oil and gas pipelines, right? And so that was a big deal. And then, of course, we're rolling into this election season. And traditionally, I've seen it the last 3 election cycles that you get about 6 months away from that election and things are slowly turning down. And eventually it just comes to a standstill. So I think you had this pandemic thing that started up. We were having troubles with lead times. We were having troubles with transportation. We were having troubles with getting to trade shows in front of customers. And it really was affecting us big time. The jobs started to push from 2020 into 2021, and a lot of them indefinitely pushed. They're not coming back. So real hard time for us, and I think we're down 50% now.
Bob, you can kind of give us an overview from the statewide. Nearly 40% of the manufacturers we surveyed predicted that they would see revenue and profitability decreases of 10% or more this year. This was the highest percentage since 2008. To what kinds of things are you hearing that have attributed to these losses?
Well, I think it's interesting to compare it back to the downturn of 10 to 12 years ago. When manufacturers can control something, they have confidence that they're going to solve the problem. When they feel like they can't control it, it really had an effect on this survey. And COVID is very different than any downturn that they've lived through in the past, and I think that's clearly reflected. But just listening to Dave and to Jason, you see the variety. You got one company way up and one way down, so the average is kind of hard to predict. But I can tell from our clients and prospects and the manufacturers that were part of our peer councils and part of the focus groups of the state of manufacturing, I'd say in general, more were down 10 to 15% than were steady or up like David, and a few were way down. So I think it's the concern of not knowing where the end comes with the COVID, which is very new to us.
The survey suggested that the impact of the COVID-19 economy has been felt a little bit less in the western half of the state. Now, Jason, you're in Bemidji, and Dave, one of your businesses is in Glencoe, so not necessarily to the west, but can you comment on what's going on in the west that's contrary or different from the east? Any one of you?
Well, it's speculative from my standpoint. We're not really affected. I don't think. We just had a little bit of this conversation in the waiting room in northern rural Minnesota, central Minnesota, here in Bemidji. We're not seeing as the impacts that they are seeing on the western side. I can only speculate, but it could be because of North and South Dakota. They're in relation to what they're doing over there, and the more rural areas being rural, I don't know.
Bob, something to do with maybe the outbreak in the metro area that hasn't been felt yet out west?
Well, if you look at, that survey is based on the 3 initiative foundations that do border the western. The population difference between those 3 initiative foundations versus the eastern 3 is hugely different. And I think with lesser population, people were maybe a little less concerned about the impact of COVID early on. But certainly Jason mentioned that they might have taken it a little more casual. But I can assure you, Tom, that that's not the case today. And manufacturers have sanitized, put in temperature testing, enlarged their facilities to make sure people are spaced properly. They do not want any effect on their business or their people. So they're really taking it serious regardless of what part of the state. Though back a couple months ago, I think the less populated just didn't feel it was quite as important to them.
I want to get to some of the best practices that have been implemented at your different plants. But what about indirect impacts on your businesses, like materials acquisition? I know the building industry has had a tough time getting lumber because the mills haven't been producing to capacity. Have you had any trouble getting what you need to maintain your production levels, Dave?
Yeah, definitely we have. Like I said, we've been, trying to ramp up here at our plant in Anoka and the plant at Glencoe. We already talked earlier about, trying to find employees. That's been difficult. But as far as the supply chain, there's been some impact. We do get some of ours overseas. That's been impacted, certainly with the COVID and lockdowns. And then domestically, so initially when we were ramping up, a lot of our supply base still had not come back to the plants. They had not put anything in place yet. So we were finding it extremely difficult to get those products. That has improved over the last month or two, though.
Okay. Jason, what are you seeing?
Some improvement, but not a lot. A lot of hydroelectrical products with us. A lot of products that have been that are affected by transport overseas. You wouldn't even think of. It's the components inside of the components, if you will, right? So electronics, for instance, a module that is built here in the U.S. might have a component from China. Some of those components, those products, still hard to get. Lead times have extended from 60 to 90 days out to 120, 150, and so on. And so it's been difficult for us. Another big product is in the hydraulic valving. This has been a difficult for us for the last really 3 years, and it definitely hasn't gotten any better.
EJ, material acquisition for you as students in the pipeline. Are you seeing a steady flow of people interested in what you're offering at Dunwoody?
We are. It's caused a little bit of a havoc in how we access those students. We used to do face-to-face open houses, and we'd bring hundreds of high school kids and their parents on campus all at once. And so my raw material are these kids coming out of high school, and we can't do that anymore. So we do a lot of one-on-one tours. We do a lot of Zoom meetings like this, but really nothing takes the place of walking a prospective student into the machine shop or into the weld shop or putting the teach pendant of a robot in their hands and really getting them excited about the education they're about to go on. So when we can get those folks into campus, it really, really helps fill that pipeline. But also our connections to the high schools too. I have a bunch of high school teachers, tech ed teachers that I'm working with right now, where they're trying to figure out what can they do. Maybe they're limited in the amount of times they can have them in for a wood shop or a metal shop course in a week. What other things, simulation software, can they access some of our tools that can be used online? So it's definitely affected the way we recruit students.
Thank you. Bob commented earlier about some of the safeguards against COVID, but what are you doing anything different or particularly special at your plants, Dave? Safeguards against COVID?
It's really unbelievable. We took it seriously right from the get-go. We are doing temperature checks when people are walking in. We have a station, social distancing. We had to redo our break rooms to allow for that. Cleaning. We just hired a COVID coordinator to coordinate all of this. Masks 100%, time clock flow, and we now just bought a fogger. So we're taking this very seriously and want to continue to keep our employees safe and make it, a very safe workplace.
Jason, how about at LaValley Industries? What are you doing anything particularly special, best practices that you share with our viewers?
Well, a lot of this stuff is pushed by the state as of what, you should be doing at your campus, and being proactive, trying to do what we can. We've put together an app that people check into every morning. You let the company know if you have any symptoms, and what are they, and then what your temperature is before you even come into work, and if you are coming into work or not. That's kind of a neat deal that our team has put together. Of course, we've had to keep our workers out of harm's way, the 6 foot apart, putting up protective plastics and things hanging around, separating our personnel. Along with the face masks, of course. And then we got a cleaning policy that the safety team has put together. Every day someone goes around and cleans all the handles and doors, walkway railings, things of that nature. And then, of course, there's everybody around their desks. They have a certain process to try and follow that the team has put together. And everybody's doing a good job to try to take care of themselves and look out for one another around them, because the pandemic, really, the COVID isn't necessarily about you. It's the others around you and worrying about their family members as well. So we've done a pretty good job, I think. But once again, it's kind of interesting because there a lot of these, I guess, they're not even real regulations, but these policies that are being formed around us are these are just things you have to do in order to be compliant at the end of the day.
Often there are better practices being maintained inside your plants than perhaps outside when people get, when they leave work or leave school. EJ, is Dunwoody doing anything particularly interesting around COVID?
It's very similar to what Jason and Dave are talking about. Our students are required to go through a temperature scan as they walk in every day. They're required to wear a mask. The smaller class sizes in the labs, where we're running at half capacity in our labs, really helps promote social distancing. Many of our theory courses now are taught completely online, which is another thing that helps promote the number of students on campus at any given time held to a minimum. The other thing I'd mention too is we've done a lot of projects. We actually have kind of turned it around. We've made face masks. We've injection molded parts for face shields. So we're actually also doing some, and we've even had our students fabricate stands to hold plexiglass and stuff like that. So not only from the standpoint of protecting each other, we've also turned it into classroom projects in a few cases as well.
Thank you. Let's get into a few questions about staffing and workforce issues, along with concerns about healthcare costs and economic uncertainty and the constant challenge of attracting workers. For our survey respondents, developing future leaders has been a growing concern. Dave, you get to look at 4 operations within the Franzen companies. What do you think's going on there?
Well, again, the developing future leaders, as I mentioned on a couple of the plants, we've been growing so rapidly that it's been difficult even finding those potential leaders to support that growth, whether it's growing from within or hiring from the outside. So I would say that's been the big one. But now that I don't even want to call it a pause, but a little bit of the slope isn't as high. We're now getting into that. We're doing much more training and really starting to look at succession planning and things of that nature now that you can take a slight breather. But it has been very difficult finding, qualified folks that want to work in manufacturing.
Bob, what's your take on that question?
Well, historically, developing future leaders was you took the machinist who had been there the longest and told he or she on Monday morning that you're now the supervisor or the manager. And that didn't work from the capabilities of learning how to be a supervisor. So then you went outside and you hired someone that had that experience but didn't fit your culture. And I think COVID has really driven manufacturers to really start appreciating that, when you say people are the key resource we have, they really mean it in a different way, that they have to develop. And manufacturing's changing. Automation, robotics, the kind of tools that we're now being asked to use are so different and advanced that the leadership has to be different than it used to be. It's not just understanding a process. It's really a more complex, because manufacturing has got more automation, less of what I'd call the carpal tunnel jobs. So I think COVID's really raised the visibility of communication and the value of culture to a new level for all manufacturers.
Yeah.
Why do workforce issues like attracting and retaining workers seem to be more urgent, at least per the survey, in the western half of the state? Jason, do you have any thoughts on that?
What's the question again? Retaining?
Retaining and attracting workers seems to be more urgent in the West. At least the numbers are higher in the West than the eastern region surveyed.
Well, I don't know about the West. Again, I'm not really affected by the West, but talking about retaining workers in the culture, I think what Bob said back in his response was, you got to have a good culture at your place, and you got to take care of your people. We've vertically integrated here. We've had a good base of employment here with the fading of the lumber industry in our region. So we got a good blue collar working group of people around here that have been displaced. We've elected to really focus on training these folks, regardless of their backgrounds, and really impose our culture here at LaValley Industries. And it's worked really well for us. So we have folks from all walks, really, that have started here from the ground up. And when things are good, we're all working extra hard and grinding. And when things get slower, we all button up and tighten up the belts around here, and we get through it. And we've been successful this year, even though we're 50% down, in being profitable still yet to date, which I think is amazing. And a lot of the tributes go to the employment, the folks here, and stepping up and meeting the challenge.
I guess this is a little bit of a crystal ball question, but do you see the pandemic having any long-term impact on workforce shortages? Let's start with you, EJ. You talked about current enrollment at Dunwoody. What are you projecting in your 5-year plan, the out years for student population?
I think part of it is we're trying to go meet the students where they're at. We know that some students are not going to want to commute to campus anymore. So if we can offer some of the coursework online, maybe have some more flexible schedules where they can come in to do a lab, but they can prep for the lab prior to coming in, whether that be online or hybrid. I know a lot of the high schools are experimenting with this. I feel like the whole education system was kind of thrown on its ear this past year, and everybody's still in that experimentation mode. We're right now, for us, it's online where it makes sense, small lab sizes where it makes sense, hybrid where it makes sense. I will tell you, we all hope to get back to whatever we call normal again. The question is is that possible? And I think Bob had mentioned this earlier. What our strategic plan was, if we talk about that a year ago, was a 5-year strategic plan looking out 5 years. Right now, we're talking about how are we going to get through spring semester, because what happens if the governor or someone else says stay at home, all education online? We're really looking at a shorter window now in all of our planning than we ever have.
I've got a follow-up for you, EJ. Are your students getting any life skills along in the technical skills so that they are better prepared to maybe take what Jason or Dave are offering in growth opportunities?
Absolutely. So with the bulk of what we offer at Dunwoody are Associate of Applied Science degrees. Many of these are technical or trade related, whether it's being an electrician or a welder or a machinist, what have you. With that associate's degree, they get a lot of the general education coursework, 20 credits of general education coursework that includes communications and social science. But what I think is really cool is we also have a pathway. So you can come to Dunwoody and get a 1-year certificate, stack on another year and get a 2-year degree. But we also have a pathway into 4-year degrees now. So if you have a 2-year degree, if you're a machinist, you've been out there working 3 or 4 years, maybe your company has some tuition reimbursement, you can do what's called a 2+2 bachelor completion program, where you can come back to school at night, online, some hybrid coursework, and you can get that in many different areas. Business management, you can get that in industrial engineering technology. We have a new automation and controls engineering technology. So like Bob had mentioned, you've said that, you're the senior machinist and on Monday you're going to be the supervisor. We have courses to get you there, to help you develop into that next step. And we'll do those on a schedule where you can still work during the day and maybe go to school at night 1 or 2 nights a week.
Jason, are you working the technical schools to make sure that they're doing the things that you will likely need in the coming years?
Yeah, we've been trying. Some are more proactive than others. But I've spoken with EJ here today in the waiting room. We're going to speak more again after. We're constantly reaching out to schools to look to them, and they're looking to us too, asking advice of what our needs are, which is great. With the pandemic, it's really shown us, and we've embraced it, that virtual administration can be achieved, and we're using it now constantly. And that's going to open the doors, I think, for a lot of manufacturers in the state that are having some workplace issues with getting employees that they need there locally. They're going to be able to spread their wings a little bit, which I think will help them a lot. Maybe not so much with on the floors and the production side and the manufacturing side. I don't know if it will there, but on the administrative side, I think it's going to help a lot, and it's taught us in embracing it that's achievable.
When I was being raised, the mantra was live to work, and it's kind of flipped into work to live. And manufacturers have put now almost 4 times more emphasis on a great work environment than on a competitive salary, although certainly the salary is really important. When you're recruiting employees, is this coming up again and again for you, Dave?
Yeah, definitely. The competitive wage, we're obviously looking at that, continually taking a pulse. We also have, sign-on bonuses, retention bonuses, trying to remain, again, competitive. But the big thing is the culture. We've definitely embraced that. We went back about 1.5 years ago and decided that we wanted to be very deliberate about our culture. We used a company called Culture by Design. And what we found is, everybody talks about culture. Well, how do you define it? It's really a set of behaviors. So we've come up with 26 Franz and fundamentals. So we use that in our hiring, in our performance reviews, in every day, every meeting. So it's been a pretty big deal for us. These things are not rocket science. They're all things that you would find very helpful. Say thank you. Focus on improvement, be easy to work with. And it's been a big help for us, finding employees and retaining.
I noticed when I was doing some research before this thing that at Plastech, for example, you work 6 days on, 3 days off. And are you taking resumes? Because that sounds like a pretty sweet deal, actually.
Yeah. Yep. Up at Rush City, that's exactly our founder and CEO started that so that we can have 24/7 operations for the plastic injection molding. And yeah, a lot of people like it. You get the 3 days off, and it varies, and it's been helpful.
Lifestyle's a big issue in Bemidji. You can go, you fall out of your plant and you're in the water fishing or out hunting and all that. Are your employees looking to you for more things like that, Jason?
Well, if you're into those things, not everybody is.
You're right. Yep.
Sometimes it's hard to gain employment in rural areas if you're not into those things. But culture is a big thing, as Dave's pointed out. We've elected to do something similar. We've as a founder of the company, we started in my garage. So what were the things that we did that helped us to survive since 2008? Really was when the first year we came out and provided a production product, worst year possible. But how did we get through from 2008 to now? And so we put through a list of culture principles. I think we have 11 of them, and we go through now when we have new employment, we go through every single one of those culture principles with our employees as they're hired. And we use that to, as Dave points out, in our employer reviews and bonusing time and all those different things. One thing I will point out too is the work environment. I believe this is something that's very important too. Summers up here in northern Minnesota, you're beautiful, as you pointed out. You want to get a little extra time out on the lake. For those who enjoy that, or the walks on the park, we have what's called summer hours. So we'll take an hour off the end of the day during when school ends till school picks up again in the fall. We think that's a big perk for our employees, and we're competing a lot of times in a small community with bigger cities sometimes. And so we do things that are with the 401ks and the matching, and we have a family first policy regarding things that are going on in these folks' lives with their child care. Sometimes we have to make exceptions for folks that have to stay home and watch their children if they're sick, or if their daycare, for instance, isn't going to be able to provide service, bring them into work. Let them sit by you. Have a little daddy or mother daycare time right at work. We open our arms to that and allow those children to come into the workplace. That's a pretty neat deal for us. So we do things like that.
EJ, do you have any kind of a mentorship program where your students can connect with people already in the business so they get a sense of what's going on and what they could anticipate experiencing once they get out of Dunwoody?
Absolutely. Pre-COVID, we would have a different company come in every week. We had an event called Focus Friday where there'd be a different company on campus every week, and they would talk to the students, and they'd talk to the students one-on-one. They talk about what it is they're looking for. I like those traits that we're talking about, working well with others and having a positive attitude and showing up to work every day. But they'd also hire our students. The vast majority of our manufacturing department students are going to get hired in their first or second semester. You graduate from a big 4-year university and wonder if you're going to have a job. Most of our students are getting hired, in their first or second semester while they're a student here. Rather than working at Home Depot or McDonald's while they're going to school, they're working out in the industry and they're continuing to learn, and they're getting mentored on the job through those OJT skills. So.
We had an interesting discussion yesterday leading up to this. The survey cited the importance of finding new customers as most important for future growth, right? If you're not selling, you're not eating. But the second trait was maximizing productivity. It was fallen off dramatically as a driver of future growth when compared to the past surveys. I didn't understand that. How does that work, Bob? Why does maximizing productivity fall in importance?
Well, we've seen it within our own services, Tom. We offer services that are focused on lean and continuous improvement. But our revenue growth, our strategy planning, our new certifications like ISO certification have just really been very strong. And now we've seen continuous improvement come back. And I think it really was related to the first couple months when the shutdown happened. Employers did not want to get rid of anybody. They wanted to keep them. They knew that if they let them go, they'd find another job someplace. But the fact is, when you're down 10, 12% and you're keeping all your employees, continuous improvement's not as important. But now that they've kind of got their revenues tracking back more to where they want it, we are seeing people reinvest internally. And I think Dave mentioned something like that earlier, that now that they've kind of taken a breath, they're back doing some continuous improvement and making the employees feel like they're more productive. So I think that we see it with our clients, exactly what the survey said.
This question will go to Jason and Dave. The economic uncertainty is 3 times more concerning today than it was just last year. And I've heard some refer to it as navigating through fog. How do strategic manufacturers figure their way through this economic uncertainty? Jason, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a great question because just for me, the election, we're waiting through that right now. My forecasts are a difference of because every time after election, we're going to have some amount of certainty. Depending on which way the election goes, things are going to pick up more rapid, or they're going to both pick up, but one's going to pick up more rapid than the other based on who's elected. And then for me, it's a 40% increase or a 20% increase. Okay, so for me, it's definitely uncertain. The pandemic, I know, is going to start feathering off a little bit for us, especially if we come up with what do you call the
Vaccine.
The vaccine. Once we get a vaccine, I think that things are going to get better, and I think once the election's over, things are going to start to ease. I hope they do. That's definitely providing a little more certainty, and I think things are going to get better for us regardless. For me, oil and gas guy, majority of our business, a couple of years ago, we had elected to start to diversify out of oil and gas a little bit. The energy companies have been doing the same. And so for us, it's a diversification is the tool, the means to move forward for us. That's the future.
Dave, do you have any thoughts on economic uncertainty and how you might navigate your way through?
As I mentioned, I mean, the COVID, the election, overall economy, is it going to be a V-shaped recovery? It looks like it is. In our case, I already mentioned we were busy with pet and agriculture. In addition to that, primarily because of tariffs, we have actually brought in molds that parts were being produced in China. We have moved those molds here onshore, and we're actually making parts that were previously made in China because of the tariffs, and we're more competitive. So, you add all that up, we've been extremely busy. Then the question for us is, does that sustain? That's probably the biggest question for us.
Okay. Now we're moving into the advice section where you guys are going to give some helpful hints to our viewers. Bob, the first one's for you. Every seat in the Minnesota legislature was up for election this week. A number of seats flipped. I've got a two-parter for you. From your perspective at Enterprise Minnesota, which way are or will the winds be blowing at the Capitol? Followed by, what will be your advice to the state policymakers about how they can best help a vital sector, Minnesota manufacturers, to maneuver through these unprecedented times?
Well, you're right, Tom. There are a lot of changes at the Capitol. Some of the great supporters of manufacturing across the state have decided to retire. But for new elected officials, I think we go right back to the survey and the two questions that Rob asked. There's unified attention to really incentives. Incentives are really related to, if I'm building a new facility, give me some tax incentives to do it and I can afford it and move it up faster, because that will lead to job growth. And then direct investments, I go back to 2010, when the state came up with the Growth Acceleration Program, which was a partial rebate to investing in employees for small and very small employees. And it was very successful. A lot of employees were kept on because of that program. Something like that would be very useful. And to the manufacturers, reach out to the new elected officials and to your economic development people and get them in your plant to show off what you are doing. Keep in mind that your employees are voters.
And so you're a pretty important part of a community. But that direct investment in employees is really going to create environment in areas where right now we're short of employees. So direct investment's, I think, the most important part of that.
Okay, to the rest of the group, 2 manufacturers and 1 educator. What's your advice to our viewers for how they can be advocates for Minnesota manufacturing and increase appreciation for manufacturing in their home markets? We'll go to education first, and when Jason and Dave are talking, ditto is not an appropriate response. Okay, EJ?
Well, you know, I think it's really important to remind our high school kids that manufacturing is cool. I still think to this day, a lot of our high schools and a lot of our middle schools, we don't expose our kids enough to the trades and to the shop and the home ec. And you know, when I was in high school, I had to take a shop class and a home ec class to graduate. Those were requirements, and they're not necessarily requirements anymore. So I hope that that parents will push their kids to investigate all of the career options that are out there. It reminds me of a story of a young lady that toured through our shop a few years ago, and mom and dad said, well, she's not going to go to Dunwoody because she's going to the University of Wisconsin. She's going to be a Badger just like her mom and dad. And I had to ask mom and dad, I said, what does being a Badger pay? Because it's not about what school you go to, it's about where your passion is. And a lot of these kids, you know, whether it's our government, you know, investing in career and tech ed, or just everybody really pushing to make sure that there's a focus on these kids exploring everything that's out there.
Thank you. Jason, do you have any advice to our viewers?
Yeah, well, we've looked at this from our region, and we often see in this rural area kids going to school, graduating, and moving on to the metro with whatever they've learned. I'm a big advocate of entrepreneurs and starting your own business. This is what I've done. But I'm also trying to help our local economy by encouraging other manufacturers and showing them what's out there as it relates to resources for them, to incentivize them to move to our region. And so one thing that I've done with the children out there to kind of help promote both of these is I've reached out to not just the high school, not the middle school. I got to start from the beginning. We're going grade school, and we've started a program called Manufacture Your Future. And I'm reaching out to the kids in the 5th grade. I'm going out to them first and foremost, and I'm going to their schools, and I'm sitting out in front of them, and I'm showing them how I took an idea and turned it into a finished product and sold it all over the world. Okay. Showed them how to chase a dream, and I showed them how to do it with things that they find in their home: cardboard, pencils, tape, things of this nature. And I show them that they can do this too, and you can do it with your mom, you can do it with your grandpa, you can do it with folks around your neighborhood. Okay, and chase your dream. And you really got to start in the youth, in the young age here. Okay, and then work with local programs as well, in through then middle school and in the high school, that help support the manufacturing and showing them the jobs that are created in manufacturing that just are not welding and grinding. So we actually then, after we go meet these kids in the classroom, we invite them to LaValley Industries. We pay for all their expenses, their lunch and their busing, and we show them the women and the men that are working in our workplace and what jobs they perform and what kind of things that they do and how much manufacturing can provide other than just welding and grinding. And this has been a phenomenal resource for our community.
Wow, that's awesome. Dave, you've had the good fortune of working in manufacturing in a number of different industries, not only through the state but around the country. What's your advice to the group?
Yeah, I mean, you know, don't say ditto, but in addition to that, we're doing a lot of the same things. You know, open houses, working with the local tech colleges, bringing people in, again, trying to show, hey, what is manufacturing? This is not Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. This is real, and there's a career path, and we try to show that. With the COVID, it's been more difficult, but I think we're going to get that started up. Yeah. We also, and we mentioned this the last time in the Northern focus group, was our CEO is so passionate about this. He has given to Pine Tech full ride 2-year technical college. He's that committed to it for a couple high schools, and many of the students have taken advantage of that. And we just talked earlier about a case where 4-year degree for one sibling, and the other one went to be a diesel mechanic, and the diesel mechanic is making a way more money. So there's some great careers in manufacturing. And as I mentioned earlier, it's only growing, and we are case in point with work coming from China back to the U.S.
Yep.
Terrific. That's great. That's great advice to our viewers. That's all the time we have today. I'd like to thank Rob Autry again for his thorough analysis of this year's survey, and to all of our panelists for their insight and expertise on this year's hot topics. You can find the survey results, bios, and other information on the Enterprise Minnesota website, and also in the latest issue of Enterprise Minnesota magazine, which should be arriving, if it hasn't already, arrived at your place. Thank you again to our Platinum sponsors for their support: Bremer Bank, Fofinski Mark & Johnson, commercial law firm, Granite Partners, private investment holding company, Gray Search and Strategy, executive search firm, King Solutions, transportation and logistics, Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development, our friends at Deed, Olson Thielen CPAs and Advisors, Production Workforce Professionals, and Widseth Architects and Engineers. Thank you for being with us today. We hope you get outside to enjoy some of this last blast of summer. Thanks very much.